their 12-year-old daughter to the living room where she was violently raped, wearing blue jeans, a tweed jacket and a balaclava.
He entered the parents' bedroom, demanded money, and tied them up with copper wire.
Described as a monster, I think that's probably accurate. He was fairly quiet as well. He took off the garbage bags he had robbed the girl.
Police are concerned the man could be capable of murder.
They say it appears he had been watching the home and knew the teenagers were alone.
He was wearing a knitted dark green balaclava with cream stitching.
13-year-old Karmein Chan had been babysitting her two sisters in their Templestowe home when the abductor struck.
Welcome everybody to a special episode of collaboration between Melbourne Marvels and Who is Mr. Cruel on the abduction of Karmein Chan and the unknown offender known as Mr. Cruel. Jay, how are you today?
Good, thanks, Eamonn. Good to be back. Looking forward to this one.
And Jay, so today it's going to be a special episode.
Right.
And the reason for that is this episode is basically about a well-known witness account. People who know the Mr. Cruel case well will be very well aware about a mysterious YouTube video that was uploaded to YouTube in, I think, 2012 by a unknown individual who just went by the handle on YouTube AN. He would regularly upload videos on Australian politics. He seems to be somewhat of a Australian Labor Party supporter. But one video he uploaded was of great interest to us because it was about something he saw on the night Karmein Chan was abducted, the 13th of April, 1991. And essentially, he had an experience that night which he feels may well be connected to the person who took Carmen that night. And this video has been discussed much on the online Reddit Mr. Cruel community. Isn't that right, Jay?
Yeah, although it's never been covered in the mainstream media, so people might be very familiar with the case but still not have heard this really interesting account. And so you reached out to this individual and met him and visited the site where he saw it a few weeks ago. Is that right?
Yeah, so his name is David. You know, I wanted to approach him and sort of ask him a few more questions in detail about this experience that he had. I think what was so compelling about his experience at the time was that he, you know, to put it basically, he was walking late at night between 10:30 and 11 o'clock through a sort of nature area in order to go and buy some milk for his infant daughter, when he came across a man who fired a shot into the air. And this startled him because this all occurred in a part of Reservoir on Edgar's Creek. And the significance of this is, of course, as everyone who knows this case well knows, Karmein Chan, her remains were later found 1 year later, about 5 kilometres north of this area, just on the eastern bank of Edgar's Creek. So basically, a few weeks ago, I met this fellow. It was a bit hard tracking him down online, but eventually I was able to do it. And we agreed to meet at the very location where he had this compelling experience. So what we're going to do today for our audience is play audio of that day where he retells his story, and I ask him in a bit more detail about the experience he had, and he'll be revealing a few more things that have not yet been put out there in the public.
It started off at home. Noticed that our milk was out. Had a small child that was now on, normal milk. She was off the powdered stuff. And we had 2 milk bars either side of us. Made the bloody mistake and didn't get milk before they shut. I think they probably shut around 8 o'clock at night. So I knew I had to get to one of the Food Plus on Gilbert Road in, you call it Region. It's where the tram starts in Gilbert Road. And I had the other choice was 7-Eleven on the corner of Henty Street and Gilbert Road. And on that night, that's the one I chose. They're both about the same distance from my house in Elizabeth Street, which is back in that direction.
Okay, so at this point now, David is standing at the westernmost point of Hillcroft Street in Reservoir, and he's intending to walk north through Allen's Reserve all the way to Henty Street. And so he's standing just to the west of 19 Hillcroft Street. There's some units there, and that's where he's describing this.
And this is sometime after 10:30 p.m. on the 13th of April, 1991.
That's right. So he believes it was about 20 to 11.
Okay.
I walked along here, and it wasn't till somewhere here, I would say somewhere around here, a shot goes off. I didn't see the bloke before he shot. I didn't even know he was there. It was quite a shock to hear a bang go off on you at a quiet night. Yeah, so straight away I look to my left. If that is direct north, I look to my left. He's at about 22 on a clock dial. He's just over here. None of the trees that are here in this area, right along up to the corner. Up near the road to here, there was none of these trees. It was all clear.
Yeah, so at this point, David is saying that the offender, well, the suspect that he sees fire the gunshot is standing right at the creek about 20 metres to his northwest. Mm. And David himself is just to the southwest of Hillcroft Street.
And did he mention what type of gun it was?
Yeah, so he says that it was actually a rifle that the suspect fires. He holds it in the air and he fires off a rifle.
Okay, which is interesting because the gun that used by Mr. Cruel in the earlier crimes was more like a pistol. So that's just something to note.
Yep. So, the offender in the earlier Mr. Cruel crimes, the abductions, he definitely brought along a pistol. And we're told later that the bullet holes in the skull of Karmein Chan were, well, there are different sources on that. I've seen a source that says 0.38 bullets, which is a revolver, and then we've got the 0.22 bullets, one source says, and of course there are 0.22 pistols and 0.22 rifles, but okay. I'm not sure if the police can tell through ballistics whether they are different. So that's something one of our audience members can tell us.
Absolutely. But what we do know is, and we'll get into the details later, but Karmein Chan was found with 3 bullet holes. And what he's reporting here is 1 shot being fired. Yeah. And so he'll go on to describe now what he believed the intention of the suspect was in this case. Now, can you describe him?
I've always known he was smaller than me. Now, I'm just under 6'2". And the cops asked me when up at the caravan, I mean, I can't judge a person's height, but I can tell you that this man was smaller than me in stature. He was wearing what I think was overalls, and he had a spray jacket over the top. Now, this is heading in, autumn? It must have been around autumn, April, wasn't it? You know, nights can get cool. And the spray jacket he was wearing, I recognised. It was one that I used to wear. So it was, mine used to be blue, And when you opened it up, it had an orange insert or lining, had an orange lining, and the stitching was in a chicken wire pattern, right? So little triangles all over the inside of the jacket. And that's important, I suppose, if someone knew this guy. Also, he had a patch. The jacket he was wearing had a pocket on the side here. It had a zipper that you would pull down, and I used to fit me smokes in it. Right, and then zip it up. Me smokes were kept out of the rain, and if I ever want one, quick zip and whip them out, And the other points about that pocket, it just had pen holders.
Okay. Any other details about this man, like the way he looked, his
The
hair?
hair didn't look right. I would say, and I've come up with the word, it was unusual. It wasn't natural. His hair didn't look natural. It was almost like he was wearing a wig.
So first he described the spray jacket there, Jay. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, it's quite extraordinary detail, isn't it? That's the first thing for a quick interaction, but he kind of explains that by saying that he recognised it as one that he had. So that kind of explains why he was able to describe that jacket in so much detail. Does sound reminiscent of some of the outfits that Mr. Cruel was known to wear. So overalls at the Will's abduction, some kind of spray jacket at the Lower Plenty attack, I believe, depending on what you call a spray jacket.
I actually David found a likeness to this jacket online, and it's a very, very familiar jacket if you see it and you were alive in this period around the early 90s. It's a jacket that was quite common at the time. So a very dark navy blue type of jacket, and we'll put a photo of that on our blog posts for this episode.
Yeah, maybe I wouldn't describe it as a spray jacket if I saw it, but once people look at it, they can make up their own mind.
Yeah, well, that wasn't a term I'd ever really heard before, but yeah. And the other interesting detail there of the description of the defender was something we've never heard before, and it was he described it as almost like a wig that the suspect was wearing.
Yeah, which is a suspicious thing for him to see, someone potentially wearing a wig and firing a gun down in somewhere where they wouldn't expect to be seen. So could this have been a sighting of the offender without the balaclava, and maybe he thought he better just put some kind of disguise in place? Speculating here, but what do you think about that, Eamonn?
Yeah, he seemed to think it looked very unusual and strange, almost eerie. Like he said, it was long, dark hair, possibly a wig. It did make me think of the suspect, Norman Lee.
That's funny you said that, because I was picturing Norman Lee's Michael Jackson get-up.
Exactly, yes. So if some of our listeners don't know, a couple of years ago it was revealed that the well-known detective Ron Iddles had a suspect he believed may well have been Mr. Cruel. It was a man who was shot dead in 1992 by police during a robbery at Melbourne Airport. He was someone that Ron Iddles described as well known to police, but as you mentioned, that day he was wearing a dark, longish Michael Jackson wig. So just did make me think of that.
Absolutely.
Whether that's connected to this, I've got no idea. I wouldn't want to speculate, but
just another interesting detail.
You're over. This guy is over there, and do you feel like when you say he's fired a shot, do you feel like he's done that as a warning of some sort?
I think he was warning me, I'm down here, I don't want you here, piss off. That's my impression of what he did that night. Because he did not look at me. guns up like this. But he's not facing the creek. He's not doing a direct facing of the creek. He's facing like that. But don't forget, he's a bit more forward than I am.
So he's facing to the northwest.
Yeah, you would say a northwest direction. He's facing, but he's making sure I can see that gun. I know he was.
Yes, so David's very strong on this point. He really felt that this man was sending a message by firing the shot. He's saying, look, you stay out of this area. It's almost like the man suddenly became aware of David's presence and he fires this shot into the air to scare David off.
Yeah, it sounds like that to me. Does that accord with, from your visiting the site, does that sort of add up?
Yeah, I mean, the 20 meters wasn't far away. Like, I think he could, even in the dark, he could sort of become aware that once the guy fires off the shot, David hadn't seen him to that point. So, yes, it's dark, but it's, I think, close enough that he could see.
Yeah, so he stumbled across the guy doing something, doesn't want anyone to be nearby. Possibly,
yeah. There was also a vehicle in Allen's Reserve that David saw on that day, and while the man was only 20 metres to the northwest at the creek, the man's vehicle, which he describes as a white ute, was much further to the north. So it was located probably between 120 and 150 metres to the north.
I don't remember seeing his car down there until that shot went off.
So you've walked up from this way. You didn't even notice the man until the shot occurred.
Didn't notice the man. Didn't notice the car.
Tell us. You said you saw a car too, but the car is not with the man, right? So the car's further up in this green area.
The car is straight north, right up as far as you can go in this paddock.
So almost right as far as Henty Street, right?
Yep.
Yeah. Now the question arises here: how could he see the car when it's so far away? I spoke to David about this on the phone. He said that it's possible because he later goes on to describe how the passenger door of the ute was open. Very well possible that the light was on in the car, and that may be why he could see it, but he hadn't focused on it until this point, until the gunshot.
Yeah, may have sharpened his attention. I guess it's hard to imagine unless you're there, but it was a light-coloured car, I think we're about to hear. So
yeah, and that's fine. Like, he goes on to describe that it's a white ute, so that's another reason why you may be able to see it at that time at night when it's no doubt quite dark in that reserve.
Yeah, and we do have reason to believe that it may have been a dark night. I know that Christian Bennett has done a lot of research into the phases of the moon, and from my understanding of that is this happened on a moonset night when there was no moon.
Yeah, possibly moonless night or very close to it, certainly darker than when the moon is in the sky. And describe the vehicle that you saw there.
I'd just say a white ute. I don't know if it was Ford, Holden. I don't know. I'm not one of these car nuts that can give you the model of the car just by looking at it. That's not me. A car for me is A to B. So he shot. I looked back forward and I noticed the car, or maybe as the shot rang out, I noticed the car. But either way, I saw him. I saw the car. The car door was open. Nothing stood out to me, just I could see it.
So the passenger door was open?
Passenger door was open. And
he must have come from that vehicle?
He must have walked over this direction. Why? Maybe he's sussing out the territory, the homes around here. And there's something I do want to add. As I fled up this street, I was looking. I was watching and looking for someone to come out. Do you know what I mean? Like, to see people react to what he'd done.
Yeah, so this is interesting because clearly the man is standing up to maybe 150 metres from where he's parked his ute. Why might he have done that? Well, if we were to speculate and consider it possible that this was the same person who abducted Carmen, perhaps, one theory might be that something had happened already between him and Carmen, that, maybe she resisted the abduction and he panicked, and we know that the abductor ends up killing Carmen, whether it happened on the very night that she was taken. I mean, this is possible, and it's possible that if this person that David saw this night was the same person, it was a panicked or panic-stricken offender looking for a place to dump her remains. Now, I'm aware that's speculation, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, if it is the same offender, then I think it's a reasonable conclusion that, well, we know that he did bury her not too far north, 5 kilometres north on the same creek. So it makes sense that he could have been looking for a place, or the alternative is perhaps she was still alive at that point and he was planning to kill her there. And if that's the case, then what he saw is incredibly significant. He may have witnessed, close, if not the murder, but the occasion of the murder.
Yeah, like you'd think that if this was the offender, that it was more than likely that she'd already be deceased and either in the ute itself or at a nearby residence, and perhaps he is scoping out a site where he can dump her remains. He's looking out towards the northwest, sort of over the creek, and who knows, like maybe he's looking for a burial site. Perhaps the firing of the shot was like a warning because he didn't want David to walk up to where his ute was, because perhaps there was something he didn't want David to see in the ute.
That's definitely possible. I guess the other thing is, we know if it's the same offender as Mr. Cruel, who abducted Nicola Linus and Sharon Wills, that offender was very careful about not letting his car be seen, and the abductor of Karmein Chan parked 300 metres down the street. So it may also just be that this guy did not want anyone seeing his car. He felt like that was a way to link back to him.
Yep.
And what David described was a white ute, which is not a car typically associated with Mr. Cruel. But at this point, I just wanted to mention there were 2 other eyewitness accounts of cars, either near the site of the abduction itself or where Carmen's remains were found in Thomastown. The first was prior to the abduction by a resident in nearby Carmen's house, one of her neighbours, and a girl saw a man in a white van, I believe, parked near at the bus stop near the Chan residence. Suspicious-looking man. So that's the first. It's a white van, which is not a ute.
I believe there's a couple of similar sightings in the weeks leading up to her abduction, and this is something we're going to go into in more detail in a future episode. But I think one of the vehicles was white. Yeah, as you said, a white van, right? And the other,
I think she then saw the same man in a sedan. So that kind of may explain why he had access to more than one vehicle.
And I believe there was also another witness who saw another man lurking
also in a sedan.
Also in a sedan in the same area near the Chan household in the weeks before the abduction. But yeah, we'll definitely get into more detail on those sightings in the future.
Yeah, and then the second one was reported in the Herald Sun in an article by Peter Costa, who described a witness, Glenys Smith, who was walking with her 5-year-old son in the Edgar's Creek area in Thomastown at some point in April 1991 on a rainy day. She believes it was after the abduction, and she saw a man digging near the creek with a shovel. And the article says he was standing by a truck, beside a truck. So we've got this account of a white van, also a man in a sedan. We've got this account by David of a man with a gun by a white ute, and then a man digging beside a truck. I don't think it says the colour. Now, they're all slightly different.
And there was also the other witness who described a different sedan, right? So that's 4 different vehicles by 3 different witnesses. Yeah. The one that you just mentioned, Glennis Smith, that's astounding, isn't it? That she saw someone digging.
Another, equally as compelling as David, if not more, digging at the actual site where Carmen was found. The only description detail she gives is he was wearing a black vinyl coat. So again, slightly different from the spray jacket. Could it be the same man? Could be. We don't know.
Yep.
But you were intending to continue walking through the little pathway all the way to Henty Street.
Yeah, I would have followed the fence lines of their houses over there.
Yeah.
Because I know there's a gap that you're not going to be walking through scrub, and it's a flat walking path where people have always walked.
And in fear of your life, you've instead taken a detour up here.
Well, I wouldn't say in fear of me life. Had he pointed the gun at me, yeah, that's fear of your life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
He shot. He didn't want me here. I got the message, buddy boy. I'm off.
Yes.
I'm off. I know that area where the body was dumped too. We rode motorbikes through here. We followed the creeks all the way to Thomastown, and even as far as Epping. There was a motorbike track up in Epping.
Yep.
And a real motorbike track that had jumps and stuff like that.
So as we walk up, I'll explain that significance. So this is Edgar's Creek. It's the same creek which a few kilometres further to the north. Karmein Chan's remains were found in a desolate site very close to the same creek, and you can actually follow the creek all the way up to there.
And I want you to turn around too and take a look at the Highline Tower.
Yeah, so as is well documented in the Mr. Cool case, as I've documented in my blog and podcast many times, so many of the crime scenes are located directly next to these high electrical power lines and towers, and we can see that one there just over the creek.
Okay, so David's describing there, right at Allen's Reserve, on the opposite side of the creek, there is a very tall electrical power line tower, and this is a theme that seems to just keep coming up in the Mr. Cruel case, Jay. So, as has been mentioned previously, Karmein Chan's remains are found at the Thomastown Terminal Station, a electrical substation. We had electrical infrastructure involved in the abduction of Sharon Wills in 1988. Her house is located right in front of another tall electrical tower with power lines leading to it. And we also know that Nicola Linus was, when she was abducted, she's dumped at the electrical substation in Kew. So it just seems like this theme keeps coming back for more, Jay.
Yeah, and that's what makes this sighting quite compelling. We know Carmen was found under the high voltage power lines in Thomastown, which run through this patch of creek where David saw the man who fired the shot. And I think some of the other businesses nearby are worth mentioning as well. At this site in Allen's Reserve, it kind of demarcates a residential area over to the east from a kind of an industrial area to the west of the creek. And some of the big businesses there, if you look at the 1991 Melways, there was a big waste station, like the Reservoir waste station, I think it was called.
Yeah.
And the Kodak factory was another huge business just to the southwest, which would have employed a lot of people. So this spot is quite isolated, and you would think that whoever came down here must have been familiar with the site to actually drive off-road into this creek area. And so that's where I think it's relevant to think about, well, what are the businesses that are there, people who may be employed in the area and who may have lived in that area.
I used to live in the area myself, and I remember a lot of the older people talking about Kodak. It was a very big employer of people in the area. A lot of people worked at Kodak back in those days, 1991 and in the 80s.
Absolutely, and that backed onto the creek as well. I think the other thing that's interesting about the site is it's also close to where Karmein Chan is believed to have done ballet lessons, and this is based on someone who contacted me online who said that they attended the same ballet school as Carmen in High Street Reservoir, which is very close to this site, so that it seems quite removed from Templestowe, but interestingly, Carmen did have a link to this suburb, if that information is correct.
Yeah, that's right. I believe it was at the Uniting Church there in Reservoir and High Street, right?
Yeah, pretty much level with where this happened in Allen's Reserve, like about an 8-minute drive away. And the other thing about this area is a Reddit user has found 2 houses in the proximity that closely match the description of the interior of the premises where Sharon Wills and Nicola Linus was found.
Incredible, because that's very rare.
It's very rare. You know, we've only seen about 4 or 5 that match the exact bathroom layout, with the unusual layout of the shower being tucked between the basin and the bath. And 2 are very close to this site.
Interesting.
David, now, one other item I'd like to, we could talk about. Close by, there was a house that was a member of a bikie, like a bikie clubhouse. Is that right?
Yep. Okay. Because by my thought process, I don't believe that the bikers had anything to do with it. That's my point of view. The only reason I mention bikers is because they had a camera at the front and a camera at the back.
So it's...
look, this is my point of view. I live across from a biker clubhouse. I'm either going to move or I'm going to put up with it, but I'm not going to lag them in.
Yeah.
It's just no, and
Yeah.
So I'm not pinpointing bikers. All I'm saying is they cameras to see if they had the footage. Well, I didn't think about it until afterwards. I thought they would have had footage of this guy, maybe.
Okay, so that is David describing how a house in Allen Street, right next to Allen's Reserve, was apparently owned by bikies at this time. Now, we did a little bit of research on the house in question in Allen Street, and what did we find out, Jay?
So the really interesting thing is that this house was sold on the 12th of April 1991. So we know it had been owned by bikies up until that date, but the day before Dave saw this event right behind the bikie clubhouse, we'll call it. Don't know if it was technically a clubhouse. The house was sold. So what could be the significance of that?
Yeah, well, it would have been in their possession still for at least another couple of weeks or thereabouts. So the bikie owners certainly, would have still been present at the time on the 13th of April, 1991. But David is of the firm belief that certainly the bikies wasn't the person he saw. He doesn't think that the person he saw when he fired the gun was a bikie. And nor does he think that the bikies would have been in any way involved in Karmein Chan's abduction. But it is interesting nonetheless.
Oh, it's very interesting. And when you hear this detail, you start to think, well, would someone who's familiar with the area take the risk of doing this behind a house where they know bikies to be? Assuming that if someone is familiar enough with this really obscure reserve, you'd think they might be familiar with the fact that there's bikies there, as Dave was. He said it was often in the local media, noise complaints from residents. So, yeah, it's an intriguing detail.
Yeah, definitely. The bikies have come up before as well, haven't they, in relation to the Karmein Chan story?
Yeah. Now, we've come across a blogger before and couldn't track it down just now, but the blogger, can you recall he overheard a conversation at a party?
Yeah, I believe he wrote this blog quite a while ago, whether it was back in the noughties or early 2010s. He described attending a barbecue, I believe it was in Templestowe, where the barbecue was, and meeting two very rough and ready fellows at this barbecue, who we referred to as bikies, who confessed to being responsible for murdering Karmein Chan. Now, I don't know what came of this, but the blog post is out there, and then we've got this bikie association that David has just brought up. But certainly, as I said before, he actually was not thinking at all that the bikies present in this area would have been the man he saw. He's got someone else in mind for who he thinks might have been responsible, which we will go into shortly.
The copper asked me if I had information relative to that area, and I said no. I said, but I've got a report from the night she was killed, or the night she went missing, right? And I said, I've never told police because I thought it had nothing to do with it. It was done over in Templestowe.
Yep.
This is Reservoir,
And the night you saw that, you didn't even know about any abduction because it wasn't reported till the next day.
Exactly.
And it was only the next day when you started thinking,
Yeah, it was the next day. And I've got to be honest, I lost months of sleep over that point. Because you lay awake at night and the mind is running over what you're seeing. You're going over it, and you're going over it, and you're going over it. How can I connect this bloke?
Yeah.
Was he there? What time was I out? And, you're going over it in your head. But I know I left after 10:30. It could have been 20 to 11, somewhere around that. And I knew I could get to that store, back home, before 12, put the milk away, get a change of clothes, relax on the couch maybe for a few minutes, then off to bed.
Yes.
Because we've got a kid that's going to scream at in 6 hours' time.
Yeah. And it's not like you've actually seen any crime. You've seen a guy shoot a gun. You haven't seen him kill anyone or take any. You haven't seen any child.
I didn't see
so
a
you
child
can understand
with him
why you'd be reluctant to report it because you're like, oh, I'm not sure. And it's only later on
when the body turns up, bang, straight away a click goes off in my head. I did see something that night. I did. I mean, how many people, if you go back in history, if the coppers go back through their reports, how many people reported a gunman out that night?
Yes, so that was David describing when he eventually reported his sighting to a police caravan in the days or hours after it was announced that Carmen's remains were discovered on the 9th of April 1992, almost exactly 1 year later. So, yeah, he's finally decided, probably after he's realised that she was actually murdered perhaps I did see someone that night. That isn't too far away from where I had that sighting. It was on Edgar's Creek, and he's gone and reported it to a police caravan. And I might add that this is a man who was, let's just say he was in trouble with the law around this time of his life. And he wasn't someone that really wanted to be spending too much time talking to police, I'd say, at the best of times. So he's had a couple of stints in prison around this time. So he obviously felt it was important enough to go and report it to a police caravan. Jay.
Yeah, well, good on him. He did the right thing. And so it's actually a year later when he's putting the pieces together and connecting the dots, because you can understand that Reservoir would have seemed a world away from Templestowe until then. So then you sort of wonder, well, how did he know that it was the exact day? But he does talk about the fact that when he heard it in the news about the abduction the day after this incident, it started playing on his mind. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. So it wasn't reported until the day after that she was actually abducted.
Yeah.
But he obviously didn't think it was enough of he didn't have enough of a suspicion yet, given it was quite far away from Templestowe, and it was only later it was revealed that her remains were found in Thomastown, not far away. So it turns out then what happened was some years later, or perhaps a year later, the Spectrum Task Force or some other detectives within Victoria Police eventually got round to attempting to get into touch with David about what he had seen. But as I said earlier, so he was in trouble occasionally with the police at that time. These detectives have turned up at his mother's house in Reservoir, and she sort of fobbed them off and said she doesn't know where he is, probably trying to protect her son. And he's never actually spoken to the detectives about his sighting. It's only recently that I know for a fact that he has gone and reported the whole thing to cold case homicide.
It's amazing, isn't it? Like a report of a gunshot near where the body was found on the night of the abduction, and that just apparently got lost in all the overwhelming information that they had, and they tried to chase it up once, but it seems like one of the most important accounts that we've got in this case, and it's great that it's coming back to light now.
According to the coroner's finding from 1997, which I got access to about a year ago. I'm not allowed to publish online, but I'm able to paraphrase from it. It referred to 10,500 IRs, or information reports, from the case, so you can imagine they were quite swamped at the time. Speaking of that 1997 finding by Coroner Ian Treloar West into the death of Carmen, I want to go over a few points from it. So what it said was that it relied on the evidence of a Dr. David Ranson, who performed the post-mortem on Carmen's remains. And Ranson identified 3 fully penetrating gunshot wounds to the head and stated simply that she had been, quote, dead for many months. That was when she was found in April 1992. So you often hear it said that she was almost certainly killed around the time of her abduction. Technically, it wasn't exactly what the man who did the post-mortem said. He just said that he couldn't say when she was killed, and she was dead for many months. So we don't know exactly when she died. And it also went on, and I found this interesting because I've seen different reports of when she was abducted, and a lot of them say 9:30, 10. Well, according to the coroner's finding, the girls were watching the television program about Marilyn Monroe, and the older 2 girls went to get something from the kitchen, and they encountered the offender at 8:40 p.m. And it seems like he's not in the house for very long. So, he goes into the bedroom, locks the two younger ones in the wardrobe, and then not long after that, he's leaving with Carmen. I mentioned in a previous podcast that a detective who worked on the case told me that, yes, he took some of Carmen's clothes. I'm still not 100% on that, even though he told me that, because he was very much trying to convince me that it was the same offender, and I wasn't convinced for his rationale for that, because he said the strongest reason was that they went to the same school. But where I'm going with this is that it's likely he was out of that house by 9 p.m. And so here we have this witness sighting between 10:30 and 11. There's definitely plenty of time for an incident to happen, whether it was in the car or whether it was at whatever detention premises he may have intended to take Carmen to. Something could have happened within 2 hours whereby he decided he had to get rid of her, or he did it in a panic or whatever. Ended up at Edgar's Creek at Allen's Reserve, came across David and decided it wasn't a secure enough spot for what he wanted to do, and ended up going to Thomastown. It's definitely enough time within that 2-hour window for that.
It all fits that narrative. And the other thing that we've talked a bit about in our previous episodes was Carmen's asthma, and that was something they made a lot of in those days after the abduction, that they thought she could be at risk of an asthma attack, and pleading for the offender to take her to a hospital. So that's the other thing that could have gone wrong. It's quite plausible that in a state of fear that it could have triggered an asthma attack, and things that may all have happened shortly after the abduction.
Yeah. Only 30 to 35 minutes drive from Templestowe at that time of the night, back in 1991. So, yeah, plenty of time for all of that other stuff to have happened.
Maybe he didn't kill her here. Maybe he didn't kill her there. Maybe he popped her somewhere else, and he was just looking for a site.
So if we speculate for a moment, you think it's possible, if we say if this was the person who took Carmen, you think it's possible he took her here looking for a dumping site? He may have already killed her, and then when you interrupted him, he changed the location later because he thought it wasn't a great site.
It's hard to say, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean,
there's obviously no evidence for that, but
I got to put myself in another person's shoes, right? I'm going to kill somebody. Am I going to kill them and then bury them? Someone's going to hear the shots, and I'm going to get seen burying.
It's only ever been reported that the abductor had a knife, which is different to the 3 other canonical Mr. Cruel attacks, where he had a gun in each of those cases.
Yeah, and yet we know Carmen was murdered and found with 3 bullet wounds to the head, and so this witness account could explain the reason why that pistol wasn't seen at the scene of the crime.
And just to reiterate, the man David saw had a rifle, and not a pistol, and we've been told that the bullet holes in the skull, where there's 2 different sources. One says .22 caliber, one says .38 caliber. And what I want to know is if there's a difference between .22 rifle bullet holes and .22 pistol bullet holes.
So if any of our listeners are experts in that area, we'd love to hear what you got to say.
Yep. Now, the other thing I was going to say was that David does have a suspect or suspects as to who he thinks he might have seen that night, and believes that they were responsible for Carmen's abduction and murder. We're not going to name them because you can get in trouble for doing that. But
what do we know about this person?
All we can say is that his reasons for suspecting these people haven't convinced me, I would say. All I can say is that he had interactions with these two men in the years after he had this witness sighting. Essentially, they were drug dealers. Yeah, so he knew them from the sort of surrounding suburbs from the area, and they may have been involved in drugs. But yeah, there isn't anything that's made me completely convinced by this account.
Yeah, it sounds like part of the reason he might have suspected this person is because the person was consistent with the man he saw in Allen's Reserve that night. So it kind of depends on this witness sighting actually being the offender, from what I've heard. But it's very interesting, and I think he's passed that on to Crime Stoppers, so we'll leave it with them.
Yeah. The whole account, Jay, what do you think? Do you find this even more compelling than when you heard it first?
Well, I think at the start it was just an anonymous YouTube video, so no one knew whether they should take it seriously. The fact that this person only posted once about this and then got back to their usual topic of politics kind of gave it some credibility. They weren't trying to convince anyone. They were just saying, hey, here's an interesting thing that happened to me. And the fact that you've been able to meet with David and talk to him face to face, and from what I've heard from you, he sounded pretty genuine, and his account hasn't changed. He hasn't sort of deviated in his story. He hasn't tried to embellish his story either. Like, there are certain parts of it that don't exactly correspond with the facts of the murder. Like, we know that Karmein Chan was shot 3 times. He never claimed to hear 3 gunshots. He says he saw a rifle rather than a handgun. And
and I don't think he ever thought that the gunshot that he saw was one that was meant for Carmen. Like, that was just, in his mind, a warning shot to him.
Yeah, but he's not trying to make his account fit the known facts of the crime, which gives it a bit of credibility. So it seems like a straightforward account, and I think it's great that you've spoken to him. What was your impression by meeting him?
What you said is true. It matched up with what he had said previously, just in more detail. So that I found quite compelling. Now, do I think he saw the offender that night? I would never say that. I think it's a very, very interesting line of inquiry that the police definitely should have looked into more and should look into more. Just because of when it happened, the night of the abduction.
And where it happened.
And the timeline, it fitted in with the timeline of the abduction.
100%. And what it sort of brought to mind for me was recently with the Easy Street investigation, and they arrested a suspect who had been questioned very early on, and he found a knife, claimed to have found a knife in the vicinity of the crime, and for decades that was forgotten. And just this year, that person has now been arrested and charged with the murder. And that's what it brought to mind for me, because this is an equally compelling account of someone seeing a gunman on the night of the abduction near where the body was found, and it just seems to have been forgotten.
Thanks very much for that, Jay. I think we'll call it a wrap there.
Thank you.
I did see something that night. I mean, how many people reported a gunman out that night?
And took their 12-year-old daughter to the living room where she was violently raped, wearing blue jeans, a tweed jacket and a balaclava.
He entered the parents' bedroom, demanded money, and tied them up with copper wire.
Described him as a monster, and I think that's probably accurate. He was fairly quiet as well. He took off garbage bags and he hadn't robbed the girl.
Police are concerned the man could be capable of murder.
They say it appears he had been watching the home and knew the teenagers were alone.
He was wearing a knitted dark green balaclava with cream stitching.
13-year-old Karmein Chan had been babysitting her two sisters in their Templestowe home when the abductor struck